The sand stings your face as you kneel beside your enemy, your hands, steady despite everything, pressing down on his wound. In this moment, you're not soldiers on opposite sides. You're just two humans in a storm. And sometimes, mercy is the bravest act of war. Asterisk. If you've ever wondered what true courage looks like in the chaos of combat, this story will show you. Like, subscribe, and join me on this journey of an impossible choice that changed lives forever. The sandstorm came without warning. Sergeant James Miller squinted through his goggles as visibility dropped to mere feet. Fine particles worked their way into every crevice of his gear, despite his best efforts. His mouth felt like sandpaper, the grit between his teeth a constant reminder of the harsh environment they operated in. "Hold position," he shouted over the howling wind to the 5 men in his reconnaissance unit. They huddled together, backs to the wind, their mission temporarily halted by Mother Nature's fury. They were 3 days into a deep reconnaissance operation in hostile territory. Intelligence suggested enemy movements in this sector, but so far they'd encountered nothing but sand, rocks, and the occasional desert wildlife. The storm was an unwelcome complication. Miller checked his GPS. They were approximately 12 miles from their extraction point, with 18 hours remaining before their scheduled pickup. The mission parameters were clear: observe and report, avoid engagement, return with intelligence. Simple in theory, but the desert had its own plans. "Sarge," Private Jenkins' voice barely carried over the wind. "Movement 2 o'clock, about 50 meters. Miller's hand instinctively tightened on his rifle. Everyone alert. Could be nothing, could be something. "Daniels, Cooper with me. Rest of you maintain position." The 3 soldiers moved forward cautiously, using the storm as cover. The swirling sand limited visibility, but would also hide their approach. Miller's heart pounded steadily in his chest, the familiar tension of potential contact settling into his muscles. They advanced slowly, weapons ready. Through the haze of sand, Miller caught glimpses of something dark against the golden landscape. Not rocks. Something else. "Hold," he whispered, raising his fist. They froze. The wind shifted momentarily, clearing the air just enough. There, half buried in a dune, lay a body. The uniform was unmistakable. Enemy combatant. Miller approached cautiously, rifle trained on the figure. No movement. Possibly dead, possibly a trap. He'd seen both before. "Cover me," he ordered, then moved closer. The man was face down, one arm outstretched as if reaching for something. Blood had soaked through his uniform on his right side, turning the sand beneath him a dark crimson. Miller nudged him with his boot. A groan. Still alive. Miller rolled him over with his foot, keeping his rifle aimed at the man's chest. The enemy soldier couldn't have been more than 25. His face was caked with blood and sand, his breathing shallow and labored. A severe wound in his side had been hastily bandaged, but blood continued to seep through. "Enemy combatant, wounded," Miller reported. No visible weapons. The soldier's eyes fluttered open, revealing pain and fear. He spoke weakly in his native tongue, words Miller couldn't understand but whose meaning was universal. "Help me." Daniels, radio command. "Let them know what we found." While Daniels made the call, Miller knelt beside the wounded man, maintaining a safe distance. The soldier's eyes followed him, desperate and pleading. "What's your name?" Miller asked, knowing the man probably wouldn't understand. The soldier coughed, spitting blood. "Fareed," he managed in heavily accented English. "Please help." Miller was surprised. "You speak English?" "Little," Fareed whispered. "American doctor taught me." Daniels returned, his expression grim. "Command says to continue mission. Storm's getting worse. They can't send extraction for a single enemy combatant." Miller looked down at the wounded man. By all protocols, they should leave him. He was the enemy. They had a mission. The storm was intensifying. But something in the young man's eyes, the raw humanity there, made Miller hesitate. "He's going to die if we leave him," Miller said quietly. "With respect, Sarge, that's not our problem," Cooper interjected. "He'd leave us to die." Miller wasn't so sure. The complexities of war were never as simple as training made them seem. This wasn't a faceless enemy. This was a human being bleeding out in the sand. How long until the storm passes? Miller asked. Daniels checked the weather report. At least 6 hours, maybe longer. 6 hours. The wounded soldier wouldn't last that long without medical attention. Miller made his decision. We're taking him with us. Sarge. Cooper's voice held disbelief. That's against protocol. He's enemy personnel. He's a wounded man who'll die without help, Miller countered. We're soldiers, not executioners. Radio the others. Tell them to prepare a medical station at our position. Daniels hesitated. Command won't like this. I'll deal with command. Right now, we're saving a life. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their gear and carefully moved Fareed back to their position. The rest of the unit reacted with surprise and concern. Are we seriously helping this guy? Specialist Rodriguez asked, eyeing the enemy soldier warily. We are, Miller confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Peterson, you've got the most medical training. What can you do for him? Peterson examined the wound with professional detachment. Shrapnel wound deep. He's lost a lot of blood. I can clean it, try to stop the bleeding, but he needs surgery. Do what you can, Miller ordered. While Peterson worked, Miller radioed command again, explaining his decision. The response was as expected, immediate disapproval. Sergeant Miller, your orders are to continue your mission. The voice of Major Harrington crackled through the radio. This is a direct violation of protocol. With respect, sir, we have a wounded man who has critical information, Miller replied, making a calculated gamble. He speaks some English and has mentioned American contacts. This could be valuable intelligence. A long pause. You're certain of this? Miller looked at Fareed, who was now receiving 4 fluids from their limited medical supplies. It wasn't entirely a lie. The man did speak English and had mentioned an American doctor. That could indicate connections worth exploring. Yes, sir. I believe this is a valuable opportunity. Another pause. Very well. Secure the prisoner and bring him to extraction. But this is on you, Sergeant. If this compromises your mission or your team, the responsibility is yours. Understood, sir. Miller out. He turned to find his team watching him. They'd heard everything. You just lied to command, Daniels said quietly. I prioritized, Miller corrected. We don't know what information he has. Could be valuable. Rodriguez shook his head. Or he could be nobody, and we're risking our necks for nothing. Maybe, Miller acknowledged. But I can live with that risk. I couldn't live with leaving a wounded man to die when we could help. The storm raged around them as Peterson continued working on Fareed. The enemy soldier drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring in his native language. Once, he grabbed Miller's hand and said something that sounded like a prayer or thanks. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of abating. Their shelter, a hastily constructed windbreak using their gear and the natural protection of a rock formation, kept the worst of the sand at bay, but conditions were deteriorating. His fever's getting worse, Peterson reported. The wound is infected. We need to move him to proper medical facilities soon. Miller checked the time. Still 12 hours until scheduled extraction, and the storm made an early pickup impossible. They needed another solution. What about the village we passed yesterday? Miller suggested. It's about 4 miles back. They might have medical supplies, maybe even a doctor. That's a civilian settlement in hostile territory, Cooper pointed out. We don't know if they're friendly. We don't know that they're not, Miller countered. And right now, it's our best option. The team exchanged glances, their reservations clear. But they also trusted Miller. He'd led them through worse situations before. If we go, we all go, Miller decided. No splitting up in this storm. We move as a unit with the wounded man. They prepared to move, securing their gear and reinforcing the makeshift stretcher. Fareed was barely conscious now, his breathing labored. As they lifted him, his eyes opened briefly, finding Miller's. Thank you, he whispered. Miller nodded once, then turned to his team. Move out. Stay tight. Visibility's near zero. They ventured into the storm, a small group of soldiers carrying their wounded enemy, united by a common humanity that transcended the divisions of war. The sand whipped around them, erasing their footprints almost immediately. It was as if the desert itself was trying to erase this act of mercy. The journey was grueling. What should have been a 2-hour walk stretched into 4 as they battled the elements. They took turns carrying the stretcher, rotating every 15 minutes to conserve strength. No one complained, though Miller could see the exhaustion in their faces. Finally, the dim lights of the village appeared through the swirling sand. Miller halted the team. "We don't know what reception we'll get," he warned. "Keep weapons ready, but not threatening. Remember, we're here for medical help, not to create an incident." They approached cautiously. The village was small, perhaps 20 buildings clustered around a central well. Despite the storm, a few figures moved between buildings, hunched against the wind. Their arrival caused immediate alarm. Villagers retreated into homes, doors slamming shut. A few men appeared with ancient rifles, their postures defensive but not immediately hostile. Miller raised his hands, motioning for his team to do the same. "We need help," he called out, hoping someone understood English. "Medical help." An older man stepped forward, a weathered rifle in his hands. He spoke sharply in his native language, gesturing for them to leave. Miller pointed to Fareed on the stretcher. "He's hurt. He needs a doctor." The older man's eyes narrowed as he recognized Fareed's uniform. He spoke rapidly to the other villagers. There was confusion, discussion, then a younger man pushed forward. "You bring enemy soldier?" he asked in broken English. "Why American soldiers help him?" "He's wounded," Miller explained simply. "We're all human." The young man translated. More discussion followed, heated at times. Finally, the older man nodded reluctantly and gestured toward a building near the center of the village. "They will help," the young translator said. "But you must leave weapons outside." Miller considered this. Surrendering their weapons in potentially hostile territory went against every protocol. But the alternative was watching Fareed die. "Cooper, Daniels, you stay outside with the weapons," Miller decided. "Rest of us go in unarmed." They followed the villagers to what appeared to be a small clinic. Inside, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses directed them to place Fareed on a table. The room was basic but clean, with limited medical supplies visible on shelves. The old man examined Fareed's wound with practiced hands, speaking to the translator as he worked. "He says shrapnel must come out," the young man translated. "He can do, but no good medicine here." "We have some supplies," Miller offered, nodding to Peterson, who produced their medical kit. For the next hour, they assisted as the village doctor removed metal fragments from Fareed's side, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed. Throughout the procedure, Fareed drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally crying out in pain. When it was done, the doctor spoke at length to the translator, who turned to Miller. "He says your soldier friend saved this man's life by bringing him here, but he's still very weak. Need rest many days." "Tell him thank you," Miller replied. "But he's not our friend. He's—" Miller paused, unsure how to explain. "He's from the other side." The translator relayed this, causing the doctor to raise his eyebrows. He responded with what sounded like a proverb. "He says in desert, only two sides, those who help and those who harm. You choose right side today." Miller nodded, unexpectedly moved by the simple wisdom. "Ask if we can stay until the storm passes. We'll compensate them for their hospitality." The request was granted. The villagers, initially wary, gradually warmed to the American soldiers as they shared meals and attempted communication despite the language barrier. Miller's team remained vigilant, but the tension slowly eased. As night fell, Fareed regained consciousness more fully. Miller sat beside him, offering water. "Why?" Fareed asked weakly. "Why help enemy?" Miller considered the question. "Because it was the right thing to do." Fareed studied him. "Your men, they follow you into danger for enemy." "Why?" "That's what good soldiers do," Miller replied. "They trust their leader, even when they don't understand the decision." "In my unit," Fareed hesitated. "Commander would leave wounded. Says weakness must be cut away." "Is that why you were alone?" Fareed nodded slowly. "Ambush 3 days ago. I was hit. Commander ordered retreat. Left me." His eyes held a mixture of pain and disillusionment. Said I was already dead. Miller absorbed this. Well, he was wrong. Yes. Fareed managed a weak smile. Because of you. As Fareed rested, Miller stepped outside. The storm had finally begun to subside, the wind dropping to a manageable level. Stars appeared in breaks between the clouds. His team had established a perimeter around the building, maintaining their vigilance despite the seemingly peaceful situation. Daniels approached. Sarge, we need to talk about extraction. We're already off schedule. Miller nodded. Radio command at first light. Let them know our situation and request pickup near the village. And the prisoner? Miller glanced back toward the building where Fareed rested. He comes with us. You know what'll happen, Daniels said quietly. He'll be interrogated, imprisoned. Might have been kinder to leave him. That's not our call, Miller replied, though the thought had occurred to him as well. He'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention. And who knows? Maybe he does have valuable information. Daniels didn't look convinced, but nodded anyway. Whatever you say, Sarge. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that their presence in the village couldn't remain secret for long. If word reached enemy forces, both they and the villagers would be at risk. Miller radioed command, explaining their location and situation. To his surprise, Major Harrington seemed more interested in Fareed than in reprimanding Miller for his deviation from mission parameters. This enemy soldier, Harrington said. What unit is he from? Miller hadn't asked. He returned to Fareed, who was sitting up now, looking stronger. What unit were you with? Miller asked. Fareed hesitated, then reached for the dog tags around his neck. He showed them to Miller, who recognized the insignia of an elite enemy special forces group. Your Falcon unit? Miller couldn't hide his surprise. Falcon was notorious, responsible for some of the most effective operations against American forces. Fareed nodded slowly. Yes, special reconnaissance. Miller returned to the radio. Sir, he's Falcon unit. Special reconnaissance. There was a long pause. Are you certain? He has the tags, sir. And it explains why he was alone in that sector. Sergeant Miller. Harrington's voice had changed, becoming urgent. That man may have critical intelligence. Secure him and maintain your position. Extraction team is en route. ETA, 3 hours. Yes, sir. Miller returned to find Fareed, watching him intently. Your commander's excited, Fareed observed. Because of Falcon. Should he be? Fareed looked away. Perhaps. Listen, Miller said, sitting beside the wounded man. I didn't save your life to use you. But if you know something that could prevent more bloodshed on either side, wouldn't sharing it be the right thing to do? Fareed was silent for a long moment. 3 days ago, before ambush, I saw something. American base, the one called Eagle Point. My unit was observing. Miller tensed. Eagle Point was a forward operating base housing over 200 personnel. What about it? Commander said we watch only. But I heard him on radio. Fareed's voice dropped. Attack planned. 3 sides. Tomorrow at dawn. Miller's blood ran cold. You're certain? Tomorrow? Fareed nodded. Many units. Heavy weapons. He met Miller's eyes. Many will die. Your people. My people too. Miller immediately returned to the radio, relaying this intelligence to command. The response was immediate. The extraction timetable was accelerated, and warnings were being sent to Eagle Point. When he returned, Fareed looked resigned. Now I am traitor. You're trying to prevent unnecessary deaths, Miller corrected. Fareed shook his head slowly. My people will not see it this way. They will see only betrayal. Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a cost, Miller said quietly. But that doesn't make it wrong. The wounded soldier studied Miller's face. You believe this? Even when your command might punish you for helping enemy. Miller hadn't allowed himself to dwell on the potential consequences of his actions. Disobeying direct orders, delaying a mission, risking his team for an enemy combatant. The list of violations was substantial. But sitting here, looking at the man whose life they'd saved, he couldn't regret his decision. Some things matter more than following orders, he finally answered. Sometimes you have to trust your humanity over your training. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Miller stepped out to find his team on alert, weapons ready. In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled approaching vehicles. Friendlies? Rodriguez asked tensely. Miller checked his watch. Too early for our extraction. They took defensive positions, the villagers hurrying inside their homes. The approaching vehicles, 3 rugged trucks, stopped at the village outskirts. Armed men disembarked, their uniforms matching Farid's. Falcon unit, Daniels whispered. They must be looking for him. Miller assessed their situation quickly. They were outnumbered in exposed positions, with civilians in the crossfire. A confrontation would be disastrous. Hold your fire unless fired upon, he ordered. Let me handle this. He stepped forward, weapon lowered but ready. A tall man with a scarred face approached from the other side, clearly the leader. American, the man called in accented English. You are far from your lines. Just passing through, Miller replied evenly. No quarrel with you today. The commander's eyes narrowed. My scout was lost in this area. Perhaps you have seen him. Miller maintained a neutral expression. We've seen no one. The commander studied him, then gestured to his men, who began moving toward the buildings. We will search the village. The villagers have nothing to do with your war, Miller objected. Leave them in peace. Peace? The commander laughed harshly. There is no peace while your kind occupies our land. Now stand aside, or we will move you. Miller's team tensed, fingers near triggers. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Commander Nazir. The voice came from behind Miller. He turned to see Farid, standing in the doorway of the clinic, leaning heavily against the frame. Despite his weakness, he'd managed to put on his uniform jacket. The commander, Nazir, stared in surprise. Farid? You live. Thanks to them, Farid indicated Miller and his team. The Americans found me in the storm, brought me here for treatment. Nazir's expression darkened. And why would they do this? Because they are not what you taught us, Farid replied. They showed mercy when our own people abandoned me. The commander's face hardened. So you betray us for this mercy? You speak with enemy. Perhaps tell them our plans. Farid straightened as much as his wound allowed. I told them nothing that would harm innocent people. Only what might prevent needless death. Traitor! Nazir spat, raising his weapon. Miller stepped between them. He's wounded and under my protection. Lower your weapon. For a tense moment, no one moved. Miller could feel his heartbeat, steady despite the adrenaline. Behind him, he knew his team had their weapons trained on Nazir and his men. One wrong move would trigger a bloodbath. You would die for this traitor? Nazir asked incredulously. I would die preventing the execution of an unarmed, wounded man, Miller corrected. Wouldn't you? Something flickered in Nazir's eyes, perhaps recognition of a shared warrior's code that transcended their differences. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. Take him, he said coldly. He is no longer one of us. But know this, American, our paths will cross again, and I will not forget your face. Nor I yours, Miller replied evenly. Nazir barked orders to his men, who reluctantly returned to their vehicles. As they prepared to depart, Nazir turned back. The village helped you? He asked. Miller understood the implied threat. The village helped a wounded man, as any decent people would. They took no sides. Nazir considered this, then nodded once before climbing into his truck. The vehicles departed in clouds of dust, leaving an uneasy silence behind. Farid slumped against the doorframe, the confrontation having drained his limited strength. Miller helped him back inside. You didn't have to do that, Miller said as he eased Farid back onto the cot. Yes, I did, Farid replied weakly. You risked everything for me. I cannot let you die for it. Miller checked the wound, which had begun bleeding again from the exertion. That was your commander? The one who left you? Farid nodded. Nazir, he believes strength is everything. Weakness is to be eliminated. He closed his eyes briefly. I once believed this too. And now I see there is strength in mercy. Perhaps greater strength than in cruelty. The sound of helicopter rotors interrupted them. The extraction team had arrived early, likely spurred by the intelligence about Eagle Point. Miller organized his team for departure, ensuring Farid was stable for transport. As they prepared to leave, The village elder approached with the young translator. He says you bring danger to village, the young man translated. But also you bring honor. You show what soldiers should be. Miller accepted the elder's extended hand. Thank your people for their help. And, he hesitated, it might be wise if they forgot we were ever here. The translator smiled slightly. Village has poor memory for such things. The helicopter landed at the edge of the village. Medical personnel rushed to assess Fareed while Miller briefed the extraction team leader. Command is very interested in your guest, the team leader informed him. They're prepping a full debrief when you land. And Sergeant? Major Harrington wants to speak with you personally. Miller nodded, understanding the implications. I stand by my decisions. Between us, the team leader lowered his voice. Eagle Point was already on alert based on your intel. Surveillance confirmed enemy movements exactly where your guy said they'd be. You probably saved a lot of lives today. They boarded the helicopter, Fareed secured on a stretcher with a medic attending him. As they lifted off, Miller looked down at the village growing smaller below them. The villagers had already returned to their daily routines, the brief intersection of their lives with the larger conflict already fading into memory. Fareed caught Miller's eye across the helicopter cabin and nodded once, a gesture of respect and gratitude that needed no translation. Miller returned the nod, then turned his gaze to the horizon, where the forward operating base awaited. The debriefing was intense. For hours, Miller recounted every detail of the encounter, the decision to aid Fareed, and the intelligence gained. Military intelligence officers questioned him repeatedly about Fareed's unit, their capabilities, and the planned attack on Eagle Point. Finally, Major Harrington entered the room, dismissing the other officers. Miller stood at attention, prepared for the reprimand he knew was coming. At ease, Sergeant, Harrington said, taking a seat. I've reviewed your report. You disobeyed direct orders, compromised your mission, and risked your entire team for an enemy combatant. Yes, sir. Under normal circumstances, that would be grounds for serious disciplinary action. Harrington's expression was unreadable. However, these are not normal circumstances. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were satellite images showing a large enemy force positioned around Eagle Point, exactly as Fareed had described. Based on your intelligence, we reinforced the base and prepared countermeasures, Harrington continued. When they attacked at dawn, we were ready. Minimal casualties on our side, and we captured several high-value targets. Miller studied the images, relief washing over him. And Fareed, sir? What happens to him now? That's complicated, Harrington admitted. He's technically a prisoner of war, but his intelligence makes him valuable. He'll be treated well, debriefed thoroughly. After that, he shrugged. That's above my pay grade. He saved lives, sir. On both sides. I am aware. Harrington regarded Miller thoughtfully. Your actions were unorthodox, Sergeant. Some would call them insubordinate. Others might call them heroic. The line between the two is often thinner than we'd like to admit. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Get some rest. Your team is on stand-down for 72 hours. After that, we'll discuss your next assignment. Thank you, sir. Miller hesitated. May I see him? Fareed. Harrington considered this, then nodded. Briefly. He's in the medical wing. Miller found Fareed in a secure room in the base hospital, a guard posted outside. The wounded soldier looked better, clean, properly bandaged, with color returning to his face. He smiled when Miller entered. Sergeant Miller, they told me you were in trouble because of me. Miller shook his head. Not because of you, because of my own choices. And it turns out those choices were right. Eagle Point, your information was accurate. We were prepared. Lives were saved. Fareed nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. Good. This war has gone on too long. Too many die for old hatreds and new greed. What will you do when this is over? Miller asked, genuinely curious. If I survive, Fareed considered the question. Before military, I studied engineering. Perhaps I build things instead of destroying them. He looked up at Miller. And you? Always a soldier. It's all I know, Miller admitted. But maybe someday. They talked for nearly an hour about their homes, their families, their hopes for when the fighting ended. Despite their different backgrounds, Miller was struck by how much they had in common. In another life, they might have been friends. As Miller prepared to leave, Fareed caught his arm. In my culture, when someone saves your life, you are bound to them. My life is now in your service. That's not necessary, Miller said, uncomfortable with the sentiment. Perhaps not to you, Fareed replied seriously. But to me it matters. Honor demands it. Miller nodded, respecting the cultural significance. Then let's agree on this. Use your life well. That's all the service I require. Fareed smiled. This I can do. In the weeks that followed, Miller's unit returned to active duty. The incident was officially recorded as a successful intelligence-gathering operation, the unorthodox circumstances minimized in the official report. Miller received a commendation for his exceptional judgment in a complex tactical situation, the carefully worded praise acknowledging his actions without explicitly approving his methods. Fareed remained at the base, his knowledge of enemy operations proving invaluable. His status evolved from prisoner to cooperative asset, his treatment reflecting his willingness to help prevent further bloodshed. Miller visited when his duties allowed, their unlikely friendship deepening despite the constraints of their situation. 3 months after the sandstorm, Miller was summoned to Harrington's office. The major was not alone. A civilian in an expensive suit sat across from him, studying Miller with interest. "Sergeant Miller, this is Mr. Keller from the State Department," Harrington introduced. "He has a proposition that concerns you and our guest." Keller stood, extending his hand. "Sergeant, your actions with the enemy soldier, Fareed Nazari, have created an unexpected opportunity. We believe he could be instrumental in opening dialogue with moderate elements within the opposition." "Sir," Miller wasn't sure he understood. "Peace talks, Sergeant," Keller clarified. "Preliminary, unofficial, but potentially significant. Fareed has connections through his family that could be valuable, but he insists on one condition for his cooperation." "What condition?" "You," Harrington answered. "He trusts you, says you understand honor and mercy in ways others don't. He wants you involved in the process." Miller was stunned. "I'm just a sergeant, sir. I don't know anything about diplomacy." "You know more than you think," Keller said. "What you did in that desert, choosing humanity over hatred, that's the essence of diplomacy. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the simplest. We see each other as people first." "What exactly would this involve?" Miller asked cautiously. "A temporary reassignment," Harrington explained. "You'd work with Keller's team, primarily as liaison with Fareed. Your combat experience and your unique relationship with him make you ideally suited." Miller considered the unexpected turn of events. When he'd made the decision to help a wounded enemy, he never imagined it would lead here. But perhaps that was the point. Small acts of mercy could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. "I'll do it," he said finally. "If it helps end this conflict sooner, I'm in." The process was slow, frustrating, often seeming futile. For every step forward, there were 2 steps back. Hardliners on both sides resisted any compromise, viewing negotiation as weakness. But gradually, painfully, progress emerged. Fareed proved to be a skilled intermediary, his personal transformation from enemy soldier to peace advocate lending credibility to his efforts. Miller found himself learning the nuances of diplomacy, discovering that the same principles that made him a good sergeant, clarity, integrity, respect for others, serve him well in this new role. A year after the sandstorm, Miller stood beside Fareed on a hillside overlooking the valley where they had first encountered each other. The landscape was unchanged, the same harsh beauty, the same unforgiving sun. But the context had transformed. A ceasefire had held for 2 months, the first step toward a more lasting peace. "It looks different without the storm," Fareed observed. "Everything does," Miller agreed. "Do you ever regret it?" Fareed asked suddenly. "Your decision that day? The risks you took?" Miller considered the question seriously. The past year had been challenging in ways he never anticipated. He'd faced criticism from fellow soldiers who didn't understand his choices, skepticism from officials who questioned his judgment, and his own doubts during the darkest moments of the negotiations. But he'd also witnessed something remarkable: the slow, difficult birth of understanding between enemies. Not friendship, not yet, but recognition of shared humanity. And it had begun here, in a moment of choice during Sandstorm. No, he answered honestly. I don't regret it. Some choices define who we are. That was one of mine. Farid nodded, understanding. In my language, we have a saying, the desert reveals a man's true nature. In the harshest places, we become most ourselves. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The peace was fragile, the future uncertain. But in this moment, on this hillside, two former enemies shared a vision of possibility that had begun with a simple act of mercy. It's time to head back, Miller said eventually. The next round of talks starts tomorrow. As they turned to leave, Farid paused, looking once more across the desert. You know, in our traditions, we believe that saving a life is like saving all of humanity. Miller smiled. In mine, too. They walked together toward the waiting vehicle, their shadows stretching long across the sand, no longer divided by uniform or allegiance, but united by something more fundamental, the recognition that even in war, especially in war, our humanity remains our most precious possession. And sometimes, in the heart of a sandstorm, that truth becomes clear enough to change everything. Asterisk, the desert reveals who we truly are when everything else is stripped away. Sergeant Miller's choice wasn't just about saving one life. It was about preserving his own humanity in the midst of war. Asterisk. If this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complex choices we face and the courage it takes to choose compassion, even when it costs us. Asterisk, what would you have done in Miller's position? Let us know in the comments below. Asterisk.